Hello, everybody. Thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams. Daniel, good to see you.
How are you, Dr. Paul?
I am doing fine. Good to have you here.
A few days off, huh?
Right. And I'll tell you what, I have some interesting stories here, and you're well aware of these things going on. Our State Department has admitted that they're going to be influencing another election, being involved in spending American taxpayers' money. I thought they were opposed to all this meddling. And
I can't believe that.
It is so bad. But the whole thing is the U.S. State Department, Tillerson admitted they were going to spend $750,000 interfering in Hungary's elections coming up. And of course, we support that, but I thought we were against foreign governments getting involved. So I guess they have to pick and choose on which ones. It's okay for us, but not for them, something like that. So to me, it's disgusting because I think so long on this program, we have pointed out the demagoguing and the inconsistencies and the whole thing that they're such hypocrites. And I would think what they're doing there fits into the category of hypocrisy at its maximum on the way we're involved in Hungary's election.
And the real irony was this new State Department program, and what it is it's to influence the media in the countryside to prop up certain newspapers and oppose other newspapers. It was announced the same week that the U.S. is demanded that RT register as a foreign agent because of unsubstantiated reports that they were meddling in our elections. So here we go, overtly meddling in Hungary's elections by deciding what kind of news the people in the countryside would hear.
Well, you've had a little extra experience. You spent a few years working in Hungary, and you know about it. But Hungary, it seems like they've been doing pretty well on their own, and they survived communism, and they're doing okay. I don't think they really need our help, especially when we're trying to undermine their process. And I'm sure they're far from perfect, but I don't see how anything that we do by interfering in their internal affairs will help them.
Yeah, and the fact of the matter is these newspapers in the countryside that the State Department has criticized, they are fully privatized. The Hungarian media market was privatized very early on. There is a state-controlled TV station. It's not very popular. The private ones, there's one owned out of Luxembourg that's very popular. It's very anti-government. So these countryside newspapers are privately owned. Ironically, a lot of them are owned by an American citizen. His name is Andrew Vajna, who a lot of people may know. He made the Rambo movies and a few other. He's a Hungarian-American, bought up a bunch of newspapers, happens to be in favor of the government, so his newspapers reflect that. State Department doesn't like that very much.
You know, there were a few Republicans that were joining Democrats to show that they were independent-minded and they would express this outrage. Can you imagine a foreign government getting involved in our elections, you know, and blowing that whole Russia things out of context and out of proportion? And they were demanding investigation to find out who's doing what. And even back then, we were pointing out that why don't they ever talk about what we have done? Well, this is current. This is ongoing. They admit it. But I wonder if they're going to investigate it. Will Congress say, hey, let's have a hearing on it? Why are we doing this? I thought we were against all this stuff. I haven't heard a word about it. You know, that maybe we should check this out. And why are we doing this in another country? Of course, we'd have preferred that they started doing it a long time ago, maybe back when just a few years ago, it became very well known how much we were involved in undermining the government in Ukraine.
Yeah.
Nobody seemed to care about this. But this is current. This is in the news, and they admit it. But where is it? Where is Congress right now? And where's Trump?
Yeah, where's Trump?
Where's Trump?
And the point is not that we are in favor of or opposed to whoever's in power in Hungary. The issue is, why is the U.S., after Hungary and places like Hungary have had how many free and fair elections, what on earth, what business is it of ours, what the newspapers say? Well, they say, the State Department says, well, these newspapers are too pro-government. They're too biased. But here's something when we were preparing for the show that I noticed. Talk about bias, you know. The Washington Post had a piece in September reporting on a study showing that 91% of the U.S. network media coverage was negative towards Trump. Doesn't care if we like Trump or don't like Trump. The fact of the matter is the U.S. media is also very biased. Maybe the Hungarians should put some money into fixing our media for us.
Well, it is a little bit strange. Orban, the president, has been pretty friendly toward Trump, and they compared him to Trump, and he actually, expressed support for Trump. But then to turn around and have this happen just seems so strange that Trump wouldn't be saying anything. And then you think about the deep state. Well, this sounds like deep state activity because it's sort of influence in the media and controlling of elections. So the deep state is obviously alive and well involved in this election.
And I think that is really the part of it. Viktor Orban is the prime minister, actually, and he was probably the only European leader to endorse Trump before the election, say, I like Trump. And they share a lot of things in common. You remember Hungary literally built a fence when these swarm of refugees was invading Europe. They built a fence and said, no. And then Brussels, the European Union, said, well, you got to take in 1 million refugees. They said no. So it has something in common with Trump, this idea of not taking in a bunch of people from Muslim countries. And so very favorable toward Trump. They had a couple of phone calls even, which is pretty remarkable for such a small country. And then here you have the State Department doing something completely undermining. And I think you're right, it is the deep state. David Kostelanchik, who's the charge d'affaires in the U.S. Embassy in Budapest, he's a longtime State Department employee, and I would say probably a deep state denizen who wants to continue America's policies toward Hungary, regardless of who's elected. I wonder if Trump even knows this is happening.
Right. Well, that'd be sad, but that's a possibility. On Soros, do you think Soros gets involved with the State Department, or is he his own guy and he tries to manipulate things in Hungary because he's been involved in Hungary for a long time? He may be losing some influence there.
Yeah, and I think the Hungarian government has a big program to denigrate Soros, and I think it probably works to their advantage. But I don't know that Soros and his organizations openly collude in a sense. But I think what happens is they move in the same circles. You've got a high-ranking Soros Foundation employee. He's going to have cocktail parties with embassy people. The thing about Soros's organizations, you never see them support a position that is in opposition to the State Department or to the U.S. foreign policy position. So de facto, they're a private arm of U.S. foreign policy.
And our side argues, the people who are involved, they say, well, we have this moral responsibility to spread American democracy. They use that. And we have to make sure that human rights are protected. But we haven't read or heard too many stories about violations, even if we were allowed to do that or should do it. We don't even hear stories about that happening in Hungary, about violations of human rights. And besides, it's worked pretty well compared to other countries with the democratic process of electing leaders.
The problems in Hungary are really that the ruling party is too popular. There's not a strong opposition, so it makes it look like they dominate so much, but he's taken a lot of popular positions. He's explicitly said that Hungary is a Christian country and we don't want to be invaded by Muslims. And whatever you think of that position, it's popular in Hungary and they continue to be voted on. But Hungary has a diverse media. As I said, it was privatized very early. A lot of it's foreign owned. But they have the two national dailies are more in opposition to the government than the ones that are in favor. So there is a diverse, and of course there have been media wars in Hungary. As you mentioned, I lived there. There have been media wars in Hungary since day one, because everyone wants to, control and get access to the media.
Yeah. No, and I think that, when it comes to Brussels, Orban has been very challenging to Brussels. And the people, I can see, because he's popular and they're doing well, they have to knock him down, because this building a wall or restriction on some immigration, that attitude might spread, and obviously it is. There's other countries thinking along these lines, and there's a faction in Germany that's still not all that happy with Merkel. And I think in some ways they have to prove this is not popular and get rid of this guy. This guy might set an example for Europe, and that wouldn't be good. So I think that motivates them as well.
And I think you're seeing a backlash in Europe, particularly in the Visegrad 4 countries of Hungary, Czech Republic, Slovakia, and Poland. They all have people in charge who are very skeptical about Brussels' open door policy. Of course, they also have big welfare states. So it's not just about what kinds of people you let in, it's about who you have to pay for. But recently we saw an election in Austria where a very young, I think he's 32-year-old prime minister was elected, who also is very skeptical about this mass immigration. So I think there is a shift, and I think it was led by Hungary, and I think has resulted in a lot of frustration with Viktor Orban in Hungary on the part of Brussels and in Washington too.
You know, my frustration, of course, motivates me to try to get information out, because the frustration is with the American people, with the American Congress, frustration with the president. We can't figure out where he's coming from and what he's doing. And then the Congress is not too interested in a subject like this. They got to decide on who gets the tax increases and who gets the tax decreases and that sort of thing. So they're not interested, and certainly the American people aren't that interested either. And in a scheme of things, this is, minor compared to some of the elections that we have been involved in. I keep going back to Ukraine and what we do and how we, participate in coups, and sometimes they're violent coups. And now we're more involved than ever. In Africa, we're very much involved in spreading more military. So this is rather mild compared to some of the other things. But if the principle of us being involved and intervening in these places should be investigated.
Yeah, it is relatively minor, but I think what caught our attention is it's so overt. Here they put out a call for tender. They put out a call for people to come and take this money and start influencing the media in Hungary. They're so unashamed. They're so they're so convinced that there's nothing wrong with it that they just completely do it out in the open. And I also wonder, there's a new Assistant Secretary of State for Europe, Wes Mitchell, who was announced. He just took office earlier this month. That's a very powerful position. But, he was one of the founders of the Center for European Policy Analysis, which is a think tank. People should really look into it because it's funded by NATO, by U.S. governments, but also by the military-industrial complex. And guess what they're all about? They're all about the Russia threat, how we got to stand up to the Russia threat, and it's, so this is where he comes from, and I wonder how much his stepping into office is influencing some of this as well.
We've looked into, or our government and our country's looked into it for political reasons, narrow political reasons about Russia's involvement. And now look at what has happened. We make the RT register as a foreign entity, and of course that's going back and forth here. So this thing seems like chaos is a benefit to some people, and they seem to stir up trouble just for the sake of stirring up trouble. And in many ways, I don't think this contributes in any way very positive. I don't know what to make of the fact that they're so blunt about it. Most of the time they sort of try to hide it a little bit. And the big issue is when they commit a coup and participate violent in throwing over government, they don't brag about it. But just when we're doing the world, justice here, which sort of fits into the theme that these are very bad people and they're violating human rights, and therefore we have to stop this guy. He's way too popular. So I think that's a part of the motivation.
The sickest thing about it is that for how many years the Soviet Union did the exact same thing with Hungary in all the countries that they controlled. If you had an editor who had the wrong party line, boom, he's taken out. If this paper was not towing the line that well, they go over. So the Hungarians and the other countries in the region defeated this kind of overlord, a distant overlord. And now here they have the U.S. coming in and saying, hey, we got to fix your papers for you. Can you imagine the kind of resentment that people would have? It's only been 25 years ago or so. And in their minds, they've got to not be happy about this.
Yeah, I don't think there's a very clear understanding of what freedom of the press means, because it looks like everybody's trying to control it. And we were always so hopeful, that the internet might free it up, but here it is. They invest money in influencing the so-called free press or the internet press. It's money talks, and unfortunately, they can be very powerful. It's back to the basic understanding of what liberty is all about, and the position and the role of government. It seems like that is where the fallacy is. No matter what I think about and trying to sort out these problems, it's always, well, what should the role of government be? And should the role of government be the policemen of the world and having social welfare programs and all these things instead of a very narrow definition of what the role of government should be. And of course, we had that understanding for a while in this country, but it's not very prevalent right today. But all the problems I can see is if we had limited role for government. And when you look at the actual real conflict when it comes to war and these other things, it's the role of government. What are they doing this, about? And why does one country have this obsession with, I got to go in there and deal with this? Most of the time, I think it's motivated by power and money and influence and natural resources and some of this other talk about liberty and freedom. And it's a lot of just big talk.
Yeah, and I think it's, to take off on what you've said, it's the issue of diplomacy. What is the role, what is the purpose of U.S. diplomacy at this point, 25 years after the Cold War? What should we be doing? Our answers would be not that, not what they're doing. And how ironic that the State Department is intervening in Hungary using our tax money to hurt the private business of an American conservative who happens to own newspapers in Hungary. Our own government funded by us is hurting a guy's business over there.
Yeah.
So.
Yes, and I think that these problems are going to exist for a while longer, and they're going to be difficult to handle. But we do have to start thinking about government on principle in order to get people to support the idea that government should be very limited. The purpose should be to protect our liberties, which means then instead of talking about interfering in their elections, we ought to be talking about trading and talking and visiting with these countries instead of worrying about how many more sanctions can we put on the various countries to punish the people, and then the people are going to overthrow their bad dictatorship. That doesn't work, and yet we do that. And just literally look at what's happening in Yemen. We support a government that's committed. You talk about human rights and violations and killing and all that's going on, and we're sponsoring this. And then at the same time, we never really question why are we doing this. And that, of course, is the big question. Someday we'll wake up, I'm sure, but we're going to continue on this program to make this point that our government is way too involved. Our government should be much more limited. We should not be telling the rest of the world how to live, and we shouldn't be getting involved in their elections, just like we don't want to be involved in our elections here, anybody involved here. So staying out of the business, internal affairs of other nations is a worthy goal. And I do believe that would move us much more quickly to the road of peace and prosperity, which we all should seek. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.